Hello and welcome to Master Edison Format. This is a channel for you to get better at Edison. And I think a couple of videos ago, or a few days ago, I got a comment when in a replay I suggested that you don't always have to shotgun dash shoot immediately. And I mean the comment was a little bit condescending, saying that that's the only way you play. Well, not specifically saying that, but from a comment I could gather that the player was basically suggesting that every single time you have to shotgun dash shoot without even really thinking. And I kind of wanted to make a video for a while on dash shoot because this is such a powerful card, but I think a lot of players utilize this in a way that you don't maximize what you get out of a card like this. You have to think that this card is at 1. This has such a strong effect. This gives you so much information that is useful for the rest of the game. But it's kind of like you should treat it the same way you treat a Dark Arm Dragon. I see a lot of times people don't summon Dark Armed into backrow, you have to treat this card. Of course, it's a trap. You're not gonna hold it for that long. But this is such a strong card that if you learn how to maximize this, I think this can help you become a much better player and get even more value out of this card. So the first thing I will say is that this is a card that is very good early in the game. It's not good later in the game. It's very good against combo decks and against decks that have, generally a lot of cards in hand. You can compare. For example, you can take something like a Frog decks usually have a lot of cards in hand. Something like Dragon Turbo has a lot of cards in hand usually. So in that case, this card is good even later in the game. Against a lot of backrow heavy decks, this is not so good. For example, against something like Blackwings, this is notoriously not great, so you have to use it basically kind of quickly or when you get a chance. Against Value Turbo, this is good early. It gets less good. It gets worse as the game goes on. And in general, against a lot of decks, as the number of cards in hand are fewer, this is not so good. I only say this to say that there are, I think in most situations, especially if you don't know what you're playing against, you should basically dash shoot. You should immediately, as soon as you get a chance, draw face, stand by face, you should probably use this dash shoot. But this is only in the situation in which, okay, you're going first, your opponent didn't, you don't have any lead or any information what your opponent is playing, and you're like, okay, this is going to give me that information that's going to be useful not only in this game 1, but also in games 2 and 3 or for siding. So I want to dash shoot immediately. And I agree with that. I don't have any problem with that. I think this is the correct play when you kind of going blind and you have no idea what you're playing against and you're going first. This is correct play because you get to see all 6 cards, and you get the most information this way. And it is correct in that case. However, I kind of want to give you some alternative things to think about and some things that I think a lot of people don't really consider when they're playing dash shoot. They just most players and you can tell if they have dash shoot in the first couple seconds. They don't even wait for you to go stand by face to pass priority. They do it as soon as you draw your card. They immediately dash shoot so you can tell if they have it or not immediately. And so that's the first thing. The other thing is, most players just think this is how you play this card and that's it. But I kind of want to give some alternative thoughts and kind of give some examples of why this is not always the correct way to play it. So in the first example, I want to give you an idea of against decks that play a lot of searcher cards and a lot of drawing cards, dash shoot is significantly worse. And I think against those decks, you might want to make a case for not shotgunning this. By those types of decks, I mean a lot of especially the hero decks, they have Rhoda and they have E-Calls. And if you dash shoot immediately, you can't hit the Rhoda, you can't hit the E-Calls, you have to take whatever they have in their hand. And oftentimes they don't have the main monsters in their hand. They might have an Arius or something like that, and you take it away, and then the Rhoda for the Stratos. When what you really want to take is the Stratos. So this is one example where, I think you want to probably hold your dash shoot. Here, if you look at this example, I'm showing, let's say the opponent has an opening hand with Upstarts, Roar of Darkness, Rhoda, Caius, and Dust Tornado. If you shotgun dash shoot, you have to take the Caius, so you get rid of this card, but then you have no idea what they have in their hand. They can Rhoda now for the card they really wanted. Let's say it's an Armageddon Knight, maybe it's a Stratos, whatever it might be. And you use your one-trick pony of the dash shoot. Now they get to Upstart, they get to Allure. You have no really information on the hand except what they search for Rhoda and the Dust Tornado. And you just use one of your best cards in your deck and you got rid of a Caius, but you didn't really take full advantage of this card. Now, what are the probabilities that they have hands like this over time? It's not super likely, except, you know, for certain decks, for example, Heroes search a lot, for example, Dragon Turbo draws a lot, so generally speaking, I would say with Dragon Turbo, you want to wait on the Dustshoot often, not all the time. It really depends, you know, on the deck or like what you see. I think if you see like upstarts trading, stuff like that, you know, you can make an argument for doing it immediately. Maybe you catch, they have trading and only one monster and you catch it and you stop them. You know, that could be good. But in general with Dustshoot, you want to take their best card. So usually you want to take the red eyes, or you want to take something that's going to let them win the game. So, you know, it's kind of like this thing that you have to, yes, you can Dustshoot immediately blind, but if you wait for them to go into double upstart and wait for them to roll down, you can, or even waiting after double upstart is already better. You get to see 2 more cards they have in their hand. And then, or if you can wait until they roll or they roll, that it's even better. Of course, you know, if you let's say this is a value turbo of some sort, you know, it's also possible they just have the Greffer and they have another monster in hand and they just go for it immediately. So that's just something to give you into consideration. I'm not saying this is always correct, but I'm saying against specific decks, for example, like Hero Beat, I think you want to hold the Dustshoot. And the reason why I say this is because on top of that, these types of decks usually also have stuff like Gemini Spark and stuff that well, you want to hold the Dustshoot after the first search against a deck like Hero Beat. This is my opinion. If they summon a monster, then you probably want to flip it because they're gonna set cards. But just to be more specific, because people are gonna be saying, oh, but Hero Beat is gonna set 5 and pass. Yeah, of course, if they start setting, you know, you have to use it before they go. Before they set, they don't have 4 cards in hand. So, you know, this is kind of the thing. Yes, you do give up, you know, knowing 2 of the cards they set, but at least you kind of potentially played around a potential Rhoda or an Eco or something like that. So this is just something to give you an idea. And of course, it's not always correct. I'm just giving some example where like the Dustshoot could be used better. For example, against decks that search a lot or have a lot of draw cards, you get this information by shotgunning your Dustshoot. Here's another example. Let's say you have Dustshoot and another backrow. You know, you can shotgun the Dustshoot, but if you're playing against a deck like Lightsworn or like, yeah, I think especially Lightsworn, or if you see your opponent set a monster like a Raiko, you usually want to wait. Because if you just, let's say you see, you know, they have an opening like end like this, maybe they have another card. Okay, if they go for heavy, then you can chain the Dustshoot and they just wasted their heavy on a 1-for-1 trade. They get rid of the Mirror Force, but you still take another card, so they use one of their best cards and they didn't really get a positive trade out of it. If they have MST, you give them a 50-50 chance to hit the wrong card. And honestly, like, I don't think you realize that like a lot of players, especially beginner players, are gonna just like random like shotgun their MST and try to hit, I don't know, the bottomless or the Mirror Force, try to just get lucky. And a lot of times they're gonna make the mistakes of hitting the Dustshoot and then you get to take advantage. The other reason is, okay, let's say you have the Dustshoot and you're afraid, you know, you with the Dustshoot usually against Lightsworn you want to take the Judgment Dragon, and usually most Lightsworn start off with a Lyra or with a Raiko, or you know, they could start off with a Lumina as well, but if they go for Lumina, it's not the end of the world in the sense that like you still have the Mirror Force or still have some other back row to protect you. But if they go for the Lyra, you give them a chance to miss your Mirror Force to hit your Dustshoot and then you can chain it. If their turn is set Raiko, you give them a chance to pop the wrong one with the Raiko. If you, of course, unless you attack into it. But yeah, like I would say, like there's a lot of situations where like you want to use your Dustshoot as bait. It's one of the best chainable traps you can have, especially early in the game against a deck like Lightsworn, which is gonna have a lot of cards for most of the game until, you know, the end, towards the end. You know that you want to hold this, and you don't really want to use this preemptively. And then they have Lyra, so you don't want the Lyra to pop your Mirror Force, and so you don't really want to take. You kind of have to take the Lyra. They have Raiko, so this Mirror Force is probably going to be dead anyway. You want to take the Judgment Dragon, so let's say you take this, and now the Lyra gets to fully pop your Mirror Force. There's no basically you don't give them a chance to hit the wrong card here. Or they can now MST instead of heavy, or you know, just in general you give them more information. Yes, you're also getting information, but you give your opponent also more information, and this way you kind of make a mistake there. Now in the next example, let's say you're playing against a deck like GBs, right? And you only have Dustshoot, you only have one set card. Or even if you have 2 set cards, let's say you have Dustshoot and a Deep Prison or a Bottomless here. If you shotgun your Dustshoot if you have nothing, they immediately know that, okay, you're gonna take one of their monsters, but then they can just attack freely and get to, you know, start doing stuff with their GB monsters. They know now for sure you have no protection. The other thing is, let's say you have the Dustshoot and a Bottomless. If you immediately use the Dustshoot, again, same problem as before. You take a card. Now, if they really want to push their prey through, they can MST your Bottomless and you're kind of stuck. While instead, if you have set 2, usually most players are not gonna, if you only see one backrow, they're gonna know that that's kind of a good backrow, and they're gonna use their MST, or they're gonna use their, whatever, they're gonna use their, you know, backrow remover on that one backrow. But if they see 2, generally speaking, they want to see kind of what's going on. They summon 1, now you can Bottomless, and then because you protected it by not using Dustshoot, and then you can use the Dustshoot after, because they set 1 or they activate something, then you chain the Dustshoot and see their hand. And you know, they really, if you know what you're playing against, like, you really get the opportunity to maximize this card. The other thing is, okay, let's say you have nothing to stop it anyway. You have no Bottomless, nothing. Let's say they go for they go for a GB monster and they go into Bestiary. Okay, unfortunately, you know, maybe you could have Dustshoot. You could have taken one of their monsters, but if they have 2 monsters, your Dustshoot doesn't really matter here. Now you make them, maybe they go into the Bestiary and then you chain Dustshoot and take their card. So you can still, rather than Bestiary popping something else or just getting actually value for it. And so this is something that, on top of that, the Bestiary, it's easier to kill, so it's better if they go into this rather than go into a Quarry or something like that. So you just make your opponent make plays without the information that you give them by using your Dustshoot immediately. So this is another example where you should probably hold your Dustshoot at least until they do something, until they summon a monster. Of course, sometimes this might be wrong because sometimes they only have 1 monster in hand, but a lot of times decks are gonna have 2 or 3 monsters in hand, even GBs, and you're gonna get more value by holding this until the right time. Other reason for holding Dustshoot, especially if you're going first and you don't really have a good play. Let's say you only have the Dustshoot and you have the Ghost in hand. Rather than just shotgunning the Dustshoot, and then now they kind of think about, oh, should I attack into goals, should I not attack into goals, what should I do? And if you do it immediately, it's kind of more obvious that you have the goals. Not necessarily obvious, because, you know, most players would Dustshoot anyway, but it's something that they're gonna always have to think about. But since most players Dustshoot immediately and you didn't, your opponent is not gonna really expect you to have a Dustshoot here. And so they're gonna summon something, maybe like an Armageddon Knight, which plays around Bottomless, and they're gonna go for an attack, thinking that this is maybe a Deep Prison, maybe something else, and then you can chain to this the Dustshoot, take their answer to goals, and then special summon the goals. So like you can even use this as like a way to like get your goals into play without your opponent really expecting it or playing around it. And like there's other kind of added applications to having this card. So like, especially if you're playing goals in your deck, you know, of course you have to have Dustshoot and goals together, which is a one-offs. But if you play patiently like this, and you know when you're going second, I think this will reward you a lot, because yeah, there's also a possibility to just go for stuff. You know, if they have 4 cards in hand, you should probably use it, not risk it. But if they have like 5 cards in hand, you know, you kind of like want to make them commit something to the field before using a Dustshoot. Here is another example. So here's another example. Let's say you're playing against Blackwing. You know, this MST, you could have set it, you probably have it in your hand. If you're playing Blackwing, you have this Dustshoot. They have an opening hand with something like a Whirlwind, which is like their best opening. They have, you know, a good monster to someone with like a Shura, and then they have a Blizzard. If you immediately go for the Dustshoot, okay, you take the Shura, which is good. Now they have the Whirlwind in hand and the Blizzard. Okay, you got the Shura, but you didn't really out the Whirlwind, which is like the card that's gonna, later in the game, is gonna be really annoying. So, you know, the way I would play this is actually, and of course you need to know all this information, but this is pretty common. You know, against Blackwings, you know that they have stuff like the Whirlwind, you know they play MST, you know they play Icarus, so there are multiple reasons for holding Dustshoot against Blackwing in certain situations. But okay, let's say they go for the Whirlwind, they activate it. So they activate Whirlwind. Now they're gonna summon the Shura, they're planning to summon the Shura, not the Blizzard. When they activate the Whirlwind, you immediately chain Dustshoot, you take the Shura, and now they're stuck. You know, this is the beginning of the game. They're stuck with this Blizzard in hand. They want to, you know, if they summon it, yeah, they can add the value, but they can't really. That's not really an optimal play. They probably want to keep it in hand. They activated this Whirlwind for nothing. And now next turn, you know, you can use your MST and pop it, or you can use whatever. You can use your Lyra, your Raikou, whatever it is. You can basically bait them into exposing their card, and now you can punish it with you know, with you doing your turn with MST or with whatever it is, and pop it. And now they not only they lost the Shura, they also lost the Whirlwind. If you would have done it the other way around, they would have only lost the Shura, and the Whirlwind would still be in play for the later turns. Now, let's say you're playing against Zombies. You know, Zombies is not a deck that's usually super fast out of the gate. Usually they have Frodos, they have stuff like that. But if they play too aggressively and you hold your Dustshoot, you can punish them. Let's say, for example, they have an opening hand with something like this. Let's say, you know, they have either Krebons or Kaios. They don't have both. This is some example of this. And they want to go for some prey. Maybe you have a set Raikou or something like that on the field, and you kind of like, you probably would want to take the Kaios, but you want to first see what they do, because they can summon the Kaios immediately. You know, this, of course, again, I'm saying, let's say you have the Raikou here in the field. We'll put it here just to give you an idea. And you have the set, you have your Dustshoot and your Raikou. This is a pretty common opening. Raikou set 1, you don't set 2 because you don't want to play into heavy and stuff like that. So this is pretty common. And so not only this makes them think, okay, you didn't Dustshoot immediately, it's probably not Dustshoot, it's probably, you know, I don't want to play into a bottomless, it's probably a bottomless, it's probably a deepers and something like that. And so this might motivate them to go for one of the best plays you can do in Zombies, in my opinion, which is Instant Fusion into Kaios. And so they activate their Instant Fusion, they pay 1,000, summon their Fusion, which they're going to tribute, and that's when you chain the Dustshoot and you take the Kaios. And if they don't have a tuner in hand, let's say they don't have a Crab, they only play Krebons, Plague Spreader, the other Psychic, the Commander, and they play the Gale, I think, in their deck, so they don't have actually a ton of tuners. If you Dustshoot there, now they use their Instant Fusion, and they might not have a way to convert it, they might just have wasted another card. So basically Dustshoot becomes, not only you take their best card, which would have outed your Raikou, by the way, but you also take their you also basically waste their Instant Fusion, which is actually a pretty strong card in that deck. And now they're 2 cards behind, basically, or at least a card behind, because you're gonna draw for turn, you're gonna pop something else with the Raikou, which otherwise would have done something else. And like in general, like I think this is very valuable. Now, it's possible also they have the Krebons in hand, so if you do it, you Dustshoot and they have also Krebons, you kind of played around something, you can't play around everything, but at least you can still take the Kaios. And now with the Krebons you have to go into Synchro, which is not great into the Raikou, so it's still a pretty good outcome for you, but it's much better than if you just do it immediately. Now they know exactly what your backrow was. Now they can play around it. Maybe they can go into, I don't know, they can go into another prey and go into another synchro like the Hades, which would have negated the Raikou. So just something to think about. And again, as I said at the beginning, I think in most situations you want to Dustshoot, especially if you don't know what's going on or like what your opponent is playing, you want to Dustshoot immediately. I think like this is, in the majority of situations, that is the correct play. And I'm not blaming anybody if that's the way you play Dustshoot every single time. I understand, it's easier for you, I guess, to play it this way rather than think about it a little bit. And again, in a other situation, that would be correct. However, if you do know what you're up against, especially games 2 and 3, and you know the matchup, and for example, they have stuff like MST and Dust Tornadoes, and for example, they have set Raikou, or they have all kinds of stuff that you think, would make your Dustshoot better. On top of that, if you don't Dustshoot immediately, people don't expect it, so they're not going to play around the fact that you can Dustshoot them in the middle of their combo or in the middle of whatever they're doing. Like, let's say you go against Vario Turbo, turn 1, they set a Raikou. You set 1 and pass. You don't Dustshoot immediately. Well, of course, this is pretty obvious read because, it's a Raikou, you want the Raikou to pop it. And sometimes, the good players will have the opposite read. I've had the situation where I set a Raikou passed, I saw them set 1, and I thought this is either a Dust Tornado or this must be a Dust Tornado or a Dustshoot. And so I set my hand, and then, I should have popped with the Raikous, and then the Dustshoot was dead. But of course, it's something that, again, if you play against worse players, by sending you Dustshoot, you're going to get rid of the one of MSTs, you're going to get rid of a lot of heavy storms, which are not going to get value, you're going to get rid of Raikou effects, which are not going to get value, and Rairas and stuff like that. And on top of that, or even breakers, like you're going to get rid of breaker effects, which, could have popped your oppression or your bottomless or not your bottom, but your deep prison, but instead they hit your Dustshoot. And on top of that, you're going to still take their best card. So I think if you think about it a little bit, you can play this card better. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoy this type of content. Subscribe if you want to get better at Edison, and I'll catch you in the next one.